Hi, thank you so much for clicking onto my video. I'm really excited to share a little bit about worship today. Now, worship is something that I believe is becoming a real hot topic in the body of Christ. I'm seeing a lot more worship events, I'm seeing a lot more worship songs, and I'm seeing a lot more people identifying themselves as worshipers, which I think is amazing and it's exciting, and I really believe that God is doing something new. So I wanted to talk about worship, and I really wanted to talk about worship in its most rawest form and in its most biblical form. Now, worship, the word worship, is actually mentioned in the Bible 108 times. That's a lot of times. And the first time that the word worship is mentioned is in the book of Genesis chapter 22, in the story of Abraham. Now, Abraham was an amazing man. He was actually called the father of faith. Now, this is a hint. He was obviously a man who had an amazing amount of faith. Abraham was given a promise by God, and God told him, look, God, dude, you're going to be the father of many nations. Now, this was dumbfounding to him because at this point, Abraham was extremely old and his wife was extremely old. So it was kind of like, how is this going to happen, God? But God made it happen. And in his old age, Abraham gave birth to a son. Now, this son was called Isaac. And this brings us to chapter 22. God then asks Abraham to sacrifice his only son, the son that he believed God for so long, the son whom he loved so dearly. And Abraham, being the amazing man that he was, he obeyed God, and he obeyed God quickly, and he said, okay, God, I'm going to make this thing happen. So he took his son, he took some servants, he took some donkeys, and they went to the mountain to sacrifice his son. He got to the bottom of the mountain and he said to his servants, you guys wait here, me and the boy are going to go yonder and we're going to worship. And that is the first time that word worship is mentioned. In the Hebrew translation, it's actually the word SHACHAH. Now, this word means to bow down, to stoop, to prostrate. It means to lay yourself down. So in essence, Abraham was saying, you guys wait here. Me and the boy are going to go up to the mountain and I am going to lay down. I'm going to surrender myself. What an amazing picture. We see here that worship isn't just a physical act, but worship is an internal reality. Worship is surrender on the inside. Worship is response to something that you regard as valuable, as amazing, and that response is to be obedient. That response is to be surrendered. That response is to be vulnerable, which Abraham made himself to be. And so in response to Abraham's obedience, God said to him, you know what, Abraham, now I know that you fear me. And so we then realize that actually worship is merely a response to somebody that you fear, someone that you regard, someone that you have high regard for, which then also makes us realize that there must be plenty of things that we're worshiping. There must be plenty of things that we have great fear for, great awe for, great regard for, that we worship. And that's okay, but the preeminent thing that we must worship has to be God. He has to have that preeminent position in our heart. And it's interesting, when we realize that, worship isn't just an event, it's a lifestyle, right? And I'm reminded of the book of Colossians chapter 3, where it says, in all things do it as unto the Lord. So in the way that you think, in the way that you act, in the way that you live, in the way that you make your decisions, let that be an act of worship. Now, the Old English word for worship is actually translated worthship. And when we look at that, it simply tells us that all worship is ascribing worth unto something that you have great honor and regard for. And so if we have great honor and regard for God, our response must be to worship, must be to ascribe worship to Him. Now, one of the most common Greek words for worship is the word proskyneo, and this is my personal favorite. Now, this word is actually translated literally as to kiss the hand of the one that you have great regard for. It is also translated as, when a dog licks the hand of its master, or commonly amongst the orientals, as to literally bow down on your knees and to touch your forehead onto the feet of someone that you have great respect and regard for. I mean, what amazing imagery is this? To me, that looks like surrender. To me, that looks like vulnerability. To me, that looks like total obeisance, total yieldedness to someone that you have great respect for and great regard for. And you know, the common misconception is that worship is a song, or you know, worship is an event, or worship is a dance. And you know, these things are not necessarily worship, they're expressions of worship. The real picture, the real idea of worship is an internal reality that feeds into our physical expressions, and that internal reality being proskyneo, being all of these things, being vulnerable, being surrendered, and being yielded to God. Now, the last thing that I'm going to talk about is worship being sacrifice. Now, in the book of Romans, chapter 12, verse 1, it says that we should present our bodies as a living sacrifice unto God, which is our reasonable service, and this is our spiritual worship. Now, worship is one of those things that is not dependent on how you feel. It's not dependent on, you know, the mood that you're in on a particular day. You don't decide to be surrendered to God when things are working out. You don't decide to be vulnerable to God when you're feeling particularly strong. You don't decide to be laid down when things are pleasant and the ground is nice and comfortable. And I don't mean physical laying down, I mean internal laying down. Worship is a sacrifice. And you know, when we think about the word sacrifice, it really does carry connotations of it being inconvenient sometimes. You know, the idea of worshiping and living a lifestyle of worship when life is really giving you reasons not to, and giving you reasons to maybe keep yourself to yourself, or to not behave in a way that is becoming of a child of God or becoming of a worshipper. But when we realize the grandeur of who God is, the grandness of his personality, the grandness of the things that he has done for us, and just how amazing he is, you know, his faithfulness, his love, his kindness, literally, like, worshipping him is probably the only reasonable response that we can give in that moment. And so in good times and in bad times, we worship. In seasons of lack and in seasons of plenty, we must worship. And it's not necessarily singing a song. Yes, you offer that song, but that song has to come from a heart that is surrendered, that is laid down, that is prostrated, that is abased before him. So that's my little bit of information concerning worship. There's so much more, and there's so much more that I have to share. If you want to continue learning and, you know, growing with me, continue clicking on the videos. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much.